African elephant versus Tyrannosaurus rex was never close, and I'll tell you why with the power of deep dive science. For some reason, this debate has reignited online, with thousands of people arguing in comment sections and claiming that evidence favors their side. I couldn't help but get involved. Sure, there's nothing seriously paleontological about this question, but I get a kick out of answering absurd hypotheticals with the newest scientific findings. I feel that I'm in a pretty good position to provide a detailed explanation of how the fight would go down, especially when it comes to the tremendous amount of misinformation out there about the two combatants. I'll use peer-reviewed studies, communication with experts, and developing research to demonstrate why African elephant versus Tyrannosaurus rex is not really a fight. It's a predation event. First, let's cover the body size of the two combatants, starting with the elephant. The most thorough study covering extant and extinct elephants and their relatives remains Lotamendi 2016, which drew upon previous literature, equations, volumetric models, and population dynamics to estimate various species' body size. He concluded that an average fully grown Loxodonta africana bull had a shoulder height of 3.2 meters or 10.5 feet, with a mass of 6,000 kilograms or 13,200 pounds. Average fully grown cows were 2.6 meters at the shoulder and weighed 3,000 kilograms. Now, if we wanted to be truly fair, we'd take an average of both, ignoring sexual dimorphism, and use a 2.9 meter tall, 4.5 ton elephant for this fight, since that's actually representative of a normal, fully grown adult for the species. However, let's be generous and use the 6-ton bull. Hi Jerry, good to have you on the show again. The 2016 study gives us a good idea of general population distribution beyond the average as well, in case you're interested in learning about the extremes of the species. 5% of bulls are smaller than Jerry. 90% are about the same size. Large bulls, defined as massing between 6.9 and 7.7 metric tons, account for just under another 5% of the population. Less than 0.1% of bulls are very large, or between 7.7 and 9.5 metric tons, with 0.001% of bulls in the 9.5 to 10.6 ton range, in the world record territory. It's worth noting that individuals of that size are almost hypothetical, with only one reliably measured elephant, captured in 2025 actually, reaching that mass. These brackets were created by using growth curves based on predicting the global adult Loxodonta africana population in 2016, which consisted of tens of thousands of individuals. Tyrannosaurus body size is where things get complicated. I'm going to take this opportunity to address some significant misconceptions and outdated reconstructions that have been informing public opinion since the 90s, namely the uber-lean, shrink-wrapped designs by paleontologist Gregory S. Paul, who is instrumental in creating the emaciated Jurassic Park look most people are familiar with. While iconic, these recons are problematic on a number of levels. One, they're created with a specific outcome in mind rather than basing the skeletal on actual anatomy and measurements. Paul has consistently and vocally argued for Tyrannosaurus being a lightweight, super fast, lion-like predator with barely any soft tissue, despite that interpretation not being reflected by the fossils themselves. This results in incredibly skinny recons that have so little muscle mass, especially in the legs, that they wouldn't be able to walk, much less sprint at high speeds to take down prey. 2, they use incorrect measurements and methods, like taking a photo of a skeletal mount with a scale bar or ignoring different measurement standards between specimens. This results in severe perspective distortion and makes all of his T-Rex specimens crowd around the same size. Stan and Sue both being 7.5 tons, despite Sue being notably larger in every single measurement, is one result of this poor methodology. Such low masses were only obtainable in the first place because of Paul's tendency to sweep back tyrannosaur ribs and warp their gastralia to make their torso as small as possible. Crocodiles do display a degree of posterior rib sweeping, so I could see where he was coming from there, but closer relatives like ostriches have ribs that angle significantly forward. Even more relevant, we actually have three-dimensional fossils of tyrannosaurs that demonstrate deep rib cages. Dave Hone, a tyrannosaur paleontologist, goes deeper into an example of Gorgosaurus on his website. This indicates that their torsos were deeper than previously reconstructed, and we shouldn't be artificially warping their gastralia basket in order to make them as skinny as possible. The problem is that Paul had his preconceived notions about the animal and tried to warp their anatomy to fit his viewpoint. So now that we know that older, lighter reconstructions are incorrect, what's the updated size range for Tyrannosaurus? One method to estimate mass in extinct animals is to use femoral circumference allometry, or taking the thickness of the femur and plugging it into an equation to predict body mass based on modern animals. This technique is very useful for comparing broad-stroke evolutionary trends, although it falls notably short if you're attempting to estimate a precise mass for a given specimen. It only uses one measurement of one bone, and doesn't take any other individual proportions into account. It's fast, easy, and cheap, but you get what you pay for. Volumetry is the other method. creating a model of an animal and multiplying its volume by a given density to obtain its mass. This is much more involved of a process since it requires enough of a skeleton to know the length, height, and width of the animal in order to model its overall shape. It also brings a certain amount of subjectivity into the mix, since you have to decide how much soft tissue to add onto the skeleton. Too little, and you're no better than Gregory S. Paul. Too much, and you've turned your theropod into a balloon. So how do you decide what's realistic? One method is to base the soft tissue ranges on modern animals, and to provide both a minimum and maximum mass. Bates et al. 2009 and Hutchinson et al. 2011 were some of the pioneering studies in this technology, although the former study still didn't use enough muscle to be biomechanically feasible. The 2011 paper was better, and their average or realistic masses brought famous T-Rex specimens like Stan, Devil Rex, and the holotype into the 8 to 9 ton range. Dempsey et al. 2025 operated on a similar principle, creating soft tissue envelopes around skeletons based on measured values from living birds and other reptiles. It's a great step in the right direction, although it has to be mentioned that these are equation-based values and can still be more precise. That's where the ideal method for reconstructing mass is. Rather than basing bone dimensions on scale bars from photos like Paul, or using a broad equation to add soft tissue like Hutchinson or Dempsey, you can take a high-quality scan of the specimen, identify size and position of muscle scars, and painstakingly recreate the in-life muscle mass of the animal. Then you test it in a multi-factor biomechanical simulation to see if the model has enough muscles to sustain movement and adjust accordingly. That's exactly what was done to Tyrannosaurus by a team of paleontologists that includes Zhongchu Ji, Eric Snively, Frank Fang, and Kyle Atkins-Weltman. I've been working with these guys for years now, and their project is awesome. The abstract was presented at the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology meeting in November 2025, revealing that these high-precision, painstaking methods obtained a mass of 9.4 tons for the Devil Rex specimen. Now that you have a good understanding of why and how we've gotten new mass estimates for the Tyrant Lizard King, let's break down a few specimens in comparison to our average Loxodonta africana bull, Jerry, starting with the subadults to make a point. Victoria is a specimen housed at the Melbourne Museum in Australia and is not fully grown in her late teens. Our 3D scans of the skeleton indicate a hip height of 3.5 meters, rib cage width of 1.5 meters, length of 11.8 meters, and rough mass of 9 to 10 tons, which lines up with the previous 3D model created by paleontologist Oliver Demuth in 2021. An elephant of that size would be regarded as between very large and world record. Then there's Bucky, a 16-year-old Rex discovered by and named after my friend Bucky Derflinger. This specimen is short but robust, at 10 meters long with a 3 meter hip height. It likely weighed about 6 metric tons, identical to Jerry while nowhere near full growth. MOR 1128 was the same age as Bucky, a sweet 16, but much, much bigger. With a femur length 96% that of Scotty's and an even thicker femur, this beast would have been around 10 to 11 tons at time of death based on various 3D models of Scotty itself. A 2004 paper concluded that there were still 2 to 3 years of active fast growth remaining, which is a little scary to think about. If MOR 1128 had survived full adulthood, it might have ended up being the biggest Rex by a decent margin. As it is, that's at least world record elephant territory. TCMI 2003-66-1 is another subadult, one mentioned in both the recent paper on Nanotyrannus and a Tyrannosaurus histology paper by Zano and Napoli and Holly Woodward respectively. The only measurement known is a femur circumference of 535 centimeters, which according to femur allometry would result in a 6.7 ton body mass. Given how allometry consistently underestimates big theropod masses compared to more detailed methods, TCMI's likely body mass would be between 8 and 9 metric tons, which would be considered very large by elephant standards. Devil Rex, which we mentioned earlier, has a hip height of 3.88 meters, a total length of 12 meters, and a body mass of 9.4 tons. It died at 18 years old with some growth left in the tank before full adulthood and was just shy of world record elephant territory already. You might be starting to see how unfair of a matchup this really is, but now we bring in the adult specimens, those confirmed to have stopped meaningful skeletal growth. Trix, along with the newly measured specimen CCMV 33115, cluster together on the low end, both in the 9 to 9.5 ton range. Scotty was once widely regarded as the biggest Tyrannosaurus due to a 2019 paper, but 3D scans of multiple specimens have bumped him down a peg or two. He's still enormous, with multiple independently created models putting him at 10.5 to 11 metric tons. Bertha, which I covered in detail in another recent video, is far more fragmentary but seems to be slightly larger than Scotty in each overlapping measurement. Around 11 tons seems like a safe bet. The battle for the biggest Rex, and by extension biggest known theropod specimen, is between Sue and Cope. Based on scans for Sue and measurements from Cope's discoverers and preparators, they both seem to be comfortably larger than Scotty or Bertha and nearly identical in dimensions to one another. We're currently waiting to receive the scans for Cope to clarify the situation, but I'd be comfortable putting them at 11 to 13 tons for now. It's a big range, but they're big animals. And that's with a sample size of only a half dozen confirmed adult T-Rexes compared to tens of thousands for the African bush elephant. Putting Jerry at 6 tons against an average fully grown Tyrannosaurus rex of 10.7 tons grants a huge advantage to the carnivore right off the bat. Ah, but you aren't convinced yet, I see. You want to compare weaponry, do you? Oh, you sweet summer child. Let's talk to my friend the Overseer for the analysis.
Hey Vividen, thank you for having me on. We'll be covering the elephants first as a courtesy to the mammalian underdog. Principally, elephants use physical strength in confrontations, headbutting and shoving opponents of their own size or even kicking smaller annoyances like lions or honey badgers. Shoving matches are the most common form of intraspecific combat even for bulls in must. Goring is extremely rare in fights against other elephants, as given the angle of their tusks, only really being used violently against smaller animals like rhinos or hippos. When tusks do draw blood, wounds against other elephants tend to be fairly small. That being said, they are still formidable weapons within a vacuum. Their skulls are built to withstand such attacks with thick frontal bones that are still lightweight thanks to their honeycomb structure. Bull elephants will face their opponents head on, keeping their vulnerable sides out of range of a charge or stab, and they utilize their powerful foreheads as their main weapon. It is not uncommon for fights between angry bulls to result in small trees being crushed. Clearly, the elephant is the strongest terrestrial mammal of today. However, in the other corner, we have Tyrannosaurus Rex, the most physically powerful land carnivore in Earth's history. While it would also be capable of headbutting and shoving enemies in its own size range given its extremely thick skull and neck muscles, its main weapon is of course its infamous bite. According to Benoit et al.'s 2021 study, you need a bite force of at least 1,000 newtons to pierce bone. A 2022 study found that Stan, a T-Rex comparable to smaller adults, could bite down with 25,000 newtons at the front of the mouth, this being the part that would most likely be contacting an elephant's trunk, tusks, and skull. However, the study was based on the skull's width and phylogeny rather than biomechanics. Conversations that Vividen has had with Tyrannosaur and biomechanics expert Eric Snively with Oklahoma State University indicates that T-Rex's bite was likely far stronger, double than the results of the 2017 study by Gianak and Erickson. That gives estimates over 50,000 newtons at the front of the jaws for large adults like Sue. Damage done by these bites includes ripping through the bony frills of Triceratops, slicing bones in half, and fragmenting skeletal elements. What's more is Tyrannosaurus frequently suffered this level of damage in fights with one another and survived. A 2022 study showed that Y-Rex's tail was amputated and it managed to survive for long enough afterwards for reactive bone growth to begin. And the infamous Stan was bitten on the back of the skull through its neck muscles and even had 2 of its neck vertebrae break and fuse together. T-Rex's skull was built like a tank, designed to give and take ridiculous punishment that the African elephants simply can't match. But with the weaponry out of the way, it's back to you, Vividen.
Thanks, Overseer. What about agility? We know that tyrannosaurs were the most agile large theropods by a significant degree, evolved to turn quickly thanks to their association with spear-faced armored herbivores like Triceratops and Torosaurus. Elephants will likely be able to turn more quickly still, however, given their much smaller size and the fact that they're using 4 legs to turn instead of 2. But that won't help them in this scenario. Elephants in combat face forward if they feel like they have a chance of winning, pushing against their enemy with fierce headbutts, and only turn if they've lost a confrontation and are trying to escape with their lives. Exposing your side to an enemy is a death sentence, even more so when it's facing a carnivore that can bite through bone like styrofoam. As soon as Jerry tries to turn away from the Rex, he's toast. Not that he'd be able to outrun the predator if he tried. Elephant speed is incredibly exaggerated, with the fastest reliably measured individual being an Asian bull weighing less than 3 tons. He topped out at 15 miles or 24 kilometers an hour, and would be much faster than Jerry, who's over twice his mass. The most recent speed estimates for Tyrannosaurus put adults between 17 and 23 miles an hour, or 27 to 37 kilometers an hour, a pace they'd be able to keep up for quite some time given their bird-like respiratory system that makes sure they're taking in oxygen even when exhaling. However, long-term combat stamina is one area where the elephants shine. Evenly matched bulls in must have been recorded to maintain a fight for multiple days at a time without food or rest, which is frankly insane. That's like something you'd expect to find in a comic book, not a nature documentary, but animals are capable of incredible things. If the fight lasts more than a few minutes at high intensity, there's a chance that the T-Rex could tire out before the pachyderm. But if I'm being honest, the likelihood that Jerry survives that long is pretty darn low. What about intelligence? One point that's always brought up by the elephant side is that, hey, elephants are really smart, they could figure out a way to win. Well, intelligence in a fight like this is actually incredibly overrated. Unless it's to the point where Jerry can invent firearms and use on the spot, or set traps to drop boulders on his opponent, it's not helping him in a brawl. I'm sure I don't need to bring up how reptilian intelligence is understated anyway, although I do have a video that dives deeply into that subject if you're interested. If only there were a modern example of large carnivorous reptiles taking on mammalian megafauna who aren't used to being hunted in such a manner. Oh wait! Komodo dragons. This is somewhat similar, except if the dragon were nearly twice the size of the buffalo, were faster, and could shatter its skull with a bite. I hope it's become abundantly clear throughout the course of this video how incredibly one-sided a battle between T-Rex and an African elephant is. Hopefully this will help settle the debate that never should have existed in the first place. But what about a herd of elephants? How would a group of these not-so-gentle giants deal with the appearance of a predator 50 times bigger than any carnivores they're used to? The truth? Likely avoid it rather than try to fight it. A 2020 study demonstrated that elephant herds will actively avoid areas where they can even smell lions. And although elephants have gained the reputation of being indestructible team tactic juggernauts invulnerable to predation when in herds, that's not really the case. They're easily the strongest land animal around today, but they can still get taken down by groups of lions whose combined biomass is half that of an adult Tyrannosaurus. I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it's well documented that both adolescent and adult elephants are viable prey options for prides of lions. However, elephant herds can easily scatter lion prides from lounging about, using their huge size to intimidate the cats. They're big, they know they're big, and nothing in their environment can match their bigness. It's a give and take relationship, but typically ends up with the elephants on top, unless the lion pride is actively trying to eat, especially at night. Encounters at night give the sharp-eyed cats an advantage, and would also act in favor of Tyrannosaurus, which had excellent vision itself. This tactic of scare and charge might not be terribly effective on Tyrannosaurus. For one, elephant herds typically consist of a matriarch and her relatives, averaging around 10 individuals in total. An average fully grown female is about 3 tons, with world record females a hair over 5 tons. Most individuals in the herd will be 2 to 3 tons, half the size of a typical Edmontosaurus, an animal that traveled in herds of hundreds of individuals and was a favorite prey item for T-Rex. A single adult Tyrannosaurus weighs as much as nearly a third of the entire elephant herd by itself, has experience hunting herd animals, has experience hunting armored prey with superior weaponry to elephants, and is facing off against herbivores with limited capacity to harm it and whose every instinct is telling them to run. They have never faced anything like this before. A predator faster than them, 3 times the size of their matriarch, who can easily take down any one of their number with a single bite. They would most likely run rather than fight, and that would let the T-Rex pick off whichever elephant looked tastiest that day. What about Paleoloxodon? Well, I've got a whole video for that question. You can also check out the other paleontology and speculative content on the channel, including more megatheropod glazing if you're into that sort of thing. If you enjoy animal battles and survival scenarios, definitely check out the Overseer as well. You can check out my book using the link in the description and join the megatheropod level of the channel in order to receive early access to non-collaboration videos. I'm the Vividen, and I'll see you the next time I get way too interested in a question with an obvious answer.